Title: The Weight You Choose. Year: 147,500,000 euro. Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the town of Lyria's cradle, every citizen had a duty belt not as a symbol, but as a practice. It held tools, records, even burdens. When someone failed their responsibility, it was passed to another, heavier. Collective balance was secret. The Iron Sentinel once wore 12. He said little. He built walls, taught defense, swept the storm drains when no one asked. But after the 7th flood he stopped. Not from exhaustion, but from a vow. The bone scribe had recorded it. A singular sentence etched in ink that could only be read during rainfall. Your soul remembers how to let go. Your ego is the one holding on. No one understood until the belts began to break. Chapter 2. Over time, people added duties to their belts without questioning their origin. Favors for favors, unspoken obligations. Soon, movement slowed. Arguments grew louder. Tools dropped and were not retrieved. The bone scribe began holding story time in the square, recounting tales of old Lyria, when belts were empty and backs were straight, most thought in nostalgia. The Iron Sentinel listened once, then stood up and removed his belt in front of all guests. He placed it gently in the fountain. It did not sink, it floated. He said only, responsibility is not meant to be worn, it's meant to be carried together. The next day, others added theirs, but they also sorted them, not equally, but intentionally. Chapter 3. The belts became modular, shared. Children helped manage records. Elders led conflict resolution circles. Farmers trained city guards in weather patterns. Seamstresses taught swordsmiths how to mend with thread before metal. The bone scribe updated the chronicle. Now entries were loved not by title, but by impact. The Iron Sentinel built benches instead of barriers. He smiled. The town breathed easier. And when the rains returned, the writing on the fountain stone glowed. Your soul remembers how to let go. Your ego is the one holding on. Release what weighs you down. Rebuild with what remains. Idle. The light of the unseen. Year: 147,692.3 euro. Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the high citadel of Calvaran, strength was measured by silence. Those who cried out were seen as weak. Those who bled without protest were called noble. Compassion was currency spent only in secret. The Dreamwalker remembered otherwise. She had once lived among the lowland weavers, where every wound was sung into healing, and no child cried alone. But the citadel had taken her, recruited her visions to advise generals, her silence to flatter kings. She stayed silent until she met the blind poet. He wrote verses in charcoal and chalk, scattering them across corridors and balconies. One morning, she found a phrase outside the war council chamber. To love without grasping is to touch the eternal. That night, she dreamed of weeping soldiers and woke with resolve. Chapter 2. The blind poet was arrested for treason. His verses questioned the glory of war, elevated the soft over the strong. But when the Dreamwalker walked into his cell, she did not free him. She listened. He told her of the border raids, the children abandoned because they could not wield swords, the mothers ignored because they could not speak tactfully. He told her that the citadel would fall not from force, but from forgetting. The next morning, she summoned the war council and refused to dream for them. Instead, she told stories, not of glory, but of those too small to notice. They laughed, then listened, then faltered. Chapter 3. The Dreamwalker and blind poet were exiled, but their stories remained, and they spread. The people began protecting the weak not with pity, but reverence. Shields were crafted not just for warriors, but for farmers. Poems were carved into armor. Soldiers marched with lullabies stitched into their cloaks. Calvaran's laws changed, not by revolution, but remembrance. And at the edge of the valley where the Dreamwalker and poet built their quiet home, travelers still gathered to hear the poems carried by wind. On a weathered stone reads, to love without grasping is to touch the eternal, defend not with might, but with memory and care. Title: The Crown of Trials. Year: 147,115,384.6 euro. Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the cliffside city of Falanar, perfection was the law. Every resident passed through the mirror of metrics at birth, evaluated, categorized, and placed on a path to civic brilliance. Those who failed the mirror's standards were relocated to the Saltlands, a barren expanse below the cliffs. The last Accord oversaw the system, precise, poised, proud, until the tight call arose. She emerged from the Saltlands without permission, her robe stitched from cast-off banners, her voice a lullaby of waves and wind. She did not demand equality. She questioned the definition of worth. A triumph without trials, she said, standing before the council, is a crown forged in illusion. The mirror cracked. Chapter 2. The council dismissed her, yet whispers spread. Children began asking about Sullivan dwellers. Merchants sent unsellable goods down the cliffs wrapped in apologies. Artists depicted her in seafoam and shadow. The last accord descended in secret. What she found was not chaos, but community. Children learning in circles, shared meals, laughter as strong as the salt wind. She watched the tide caller teach not obedience, but listening. I've never met a broken soul, the tide caller said, only those reshaped by storms. The last accord spoke aloud for the first time without protocol. Then let me be reshaped. Together they climbed back. Chapter 3. The mirror of metrics was retired. In its place stood a basin filled with seawater from the saltlands, renewed daily by citizens who once feared the shore. Differences were no longer threats. They became threads in the city's tapestry. The tide caller never took office. She became a guide. The last accord changed her name to First Listener, and Thalanar became a city that hummed not with perfection, but harmony. Beneath the broken fragments of the old mirror, now kept in a sacred alcove, an inscription reads, "A triumph without trials is a crown forged in illusion. Celebrate difference and grow. You gather, title, the echoes of excess. Year 146,923,076.9. Era, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The Golden Borough of Drell had one rule. Take as much as you can carry. And so they did. Greed was not a vice, it was a virtue, celebrated in parade and poem. Children competed in hoarding competitions. Elders were praised for their vaults, not their wisdom. But cracks formed, not just in the roads, those were gilded and patched with bribes, but in the people. Neighbors stopped speaking unless transactionally. Families scheduled hugs through payment apps. Into this glittering madness arrived the healer who wounds. She offered no cure, only questions. Where do you keep your joy? They laughed, then ignored her. Then the markets collapsed. Chapter 2. Mid panic and platinum riots, the Thorn Warden emerged. He'd once been a wealth architect designing vaults that could only be opened by selfishness. Now he wandered the streets handing out thistles. Literal ones. Greed, he said, blooms sharp. He and the healers set up a stage in the center plaza, but instead of lectures, they performed skits comedic, biting, ridiculous. One scene featured a noble who kept buying so many chairs that he had nowhere left to sit. Another showed a child trading their shadow for a diamond that melted. The crowds laughed, and paused, then cried. You find your voice, said the healer in the final act, in the ruins where silence once ruled. Chapter 3. Greed was not outlawed in Drell. It simply became unfashionable. The richest families competed in giving things away with style. Vaults were transformed into theaters. Tax documents were rewritten as haiku. The Golden Borough remained golden, but now its light came from street lamps powered by cooperation, not conquest. The healer left quietly. The Thorn Warden planted a garden of thistles that spelled jokes in bloom, and on the old stock exchange steps a plaque remains. You find your voice in the ruins, where silence once ruled. Laugh, let go, grow different. Title, The Ember Beneath the Paw. Year 146,730,769.2. Era, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the ash-veiled city of Brent, beasts were banned. Animals were deemed distractions from the purity of logic. Statues of lions had been replaced with gears. Songs about birds replaced with calculations of trajectory. And fire, once sacred, was now mechanical. The flame prophet remembered another way. He had grown up in the outskirts, raised by his grandmother and a wounded lynx with mismatched eyes. But after the firestorm that razed his home, he came to Brent. He welcomed his mind, ignored his past. Until one day, in the engine ward, he found a soot-covered mutt hiding beneath the heat turbines, shivering, silent, scorched, and everything in him shifted. When your world collapses, he whispered, you find your foundation. Chapter 2. He nursed the dog secretly, gently. He named her Cinder. He taught her not tricks, but stillness. And in that stillness he remembered his grandmother's stories, the lynx's breath against his chest, the warmth of love not measured, but known. Then one night Cinder howled. The turbines failed. The entire city grid collapsed. Panic ensued. The prophet stepped forward not with formulas, but with Cinder beside him. Follow the warmth, he said. Follow life. The council rejected him, but the workers followed. They lit the city with hearths and stories, with fur and flame, with hands and paws together. Chapter 3. Brand changed. Not quickly, not fully, but enough. Sanctuary was built in the old gearworks. Children raised animals. Engineers consulted bees for architecture. Cinder grew old and left as silently as she came. The prophet never replaced her. He didn't need to. Now outside the sanctuary's gate, the flame burns within a steel paw. Beneath it, the words etched by many hands. When your world collapses, you find your foundation, kindness, shared breath, warmth, unmeasured, unforgettable. Title, The Clock That Laughed. Year, 146,538,461.5. Era, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the city of Everstil, clocks ruled everything. There were clocks on shoes, clocks in soup, clocks embedded into pillows so dreams wouldn't dare wander past curfew. Success was defined not by achievement, but punctuality. Enter the Oathbreaker turned savior, exiled once for being 3 minutes late to a prophecy. He returned with no fanfare, just a sandwich, a crooked smile, and a clock that ticked backward. The council panicked. The soul weaver, keeper of daily affirmation chants and regulated inspiration scrolls, was sent to assess him. She found him napping on the sacred sundial of aspiration. Late, she hissed. He cracked an eye. No, he yawned. Just early for the life I'm ready to meet. Chapter 2. He began holding the state picnics in the central square. Anyone who had failed that week got a free snack. Attendance soared. He told stories about every prophecy he'd miss, each one replaced by something unexpectedly beautiful. A failed duel that became a lifelong friendship. A forgotten wedding that led to a revolutionary idea about shoes. You are not too late, he would say. You are right on time for the life you are ready to meet. The soul weaver tried to counter him with motivational speeches on efficiency. But one day she froze. She had forgotten her speech, and instead said, I don't know. The crowd cheered. Chapter 3. Horse still shifted, not abruptly, but hilariously. Clocks began chiming jazz rhythms. Bus schedules included wiggle room. Job interviews started with tell me how you failed today. The Oathbreaker was offered a statue. He refused. Instead, he gave them his backwards clock and said, set it to whenever you start smiling. Now, in the Hall of Timely Successes, there is a door that never opens on schedule. Above it, carved with whimsy. You are not too late. You are right on time for the life you are ready to meet. Forget the bell. Follow the laugh. Title, The Reckoning of the Ground. Year, 146,346,153.8. Era, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. Nerith was the city of ascent. Built into the cliffs of the broken spine, it rose in spirals 1 level per generation, each higher than the last. Ambition wasn't merely admired, it was law. Compassion was seen as inefficiency. The sacred fool questioned method openly. He jested in council chambers and danced on thresholds no one dared cross. And beneath it all, in the shadowed roots of the cliffs, lived the one who waits. He spoke to stone, walked where the soil cracked, added names forgotten by the upward race. When the sky bridge to the 13th spire collapsed, the fool survived. Others didn't. The council blamed the elements. The fool laughed. What do you call chaos? He said. Maybe the earth remembering your true name. Chapter 2. The council dug deeper, building supports not for safety, but for height. The fool descended. He found the one who waits weaving a tapestry of names and stone veins. They fell, the fool said. They were pushed. The one replied, not by hands, by blindness. The fool carried her warnings upward, was mocked, vanished. Then tremors began, not quakes but voices from the foundations. Pressure groaning into words only the wind translated. Down, it whispered, down, too late. The 10th spire cracked, the city wept, and the fool laughed, then cried, then carried stone in his arms, 1 shard at a time. Chapter 3. The council dissolved quite literally. The one who waits emerged from beneath, guiding survivors not upward, but inward. The city was rebuilt in a ring, not a tower. Elms leaned together. Water flowed downward, feeding all. Ambition remained, but tethered to responsibility. The sacred fool planted roots. Now, in the plaza where the spires once pierced the clouds, lies a stone circle, pulsing with slow heat. At its center, etched with silver dust, what you call chaos may be the earth, remembering her true name. Listen, all, and begin again. Title, The Fire Beneath the Throne. Here, 143,133,132. Era, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The town of Eldershade worshipped silence, not peace silence. Their archives were vast, their customs strict, and their schools taught only the present. History was a forbidden luxury, believed to incite rebellion. The people followed rhythms they never questioned. The king in silence had ruled for 80 years, or so they claimed. No one remembered his coronation. No one had heard him speak. He sat beneath the throne tree, a gnarled ancient that bloomed only once a generation. Then the exiled champion returned. She bore no armor, only a charred book and a voice that trembled. To awaken, she said to the gathered hush, is to burn the self who begged for permission. And with that she opened the book. Chapter 2. It hissed. Literally, ash fell from its edges, revealing ink that shivered like firelight. Inside were stories, not myths, but facts. Records of choices made, mistakes repeated, lives lost because no one dared remember. She read aloud the tale of the harvest purge, how Eldershade had once exiled its thinkers in the name of unity. Her name was among them, asked sir, in guilt. The king in silence did not stop her. She kept reading. The next tale told of the river poison, not by enemies but by denial. And then, story of the champion herself, who once bowed to the council rather than speak truth. I begged, she whispered, and I was granted silence. Now, she burned the page, and stood taller. Chapter 3. Eldershade changed not swiftly, but intentionally. The archives were opened. Children began studying the erased years. Citizens debated policies once passed in whispers. The throne tree bloomed early, petals glowing faintly as if stirred by voice alone. The king in silence rose first time in decades and placed his crown on the steps below him. He never spoke. He didn't need to. The exiled champion became a teacher. She did not rule. She remembered, and taught others to do the same. At the center of the new public square, beside the burned book now encased in crystal, reads, to awaken is to burn the self who begged for permission. Speak, remember, rise. Title, The Roots That Remember. Year 145,961,538.5. Era, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac. Series 2025. Chapter 1. The spires of Eltharion were built atop soil that bled. Once a forest, the land now housed towering labs and processing cores. The air buzzed with equations and churned with extraction energy pulled from the bones of the world. And somewhere beyond the sensors, in the overgrowth they called the edge, watched the eyes. The eyes at the edge saw without seeing. They moved without sound. They recorded, not with machines, but with memory. And then came the Thorn Warden, branded as a terrorist. Once a scientist, now the final barrier between the last living roots and the next great dig. He wore bramble and bark, thorns and scars, and within him raged the fiercest war, the one waged within. Chapter 2. The Council of Continuance dispatched drones. They expected sabotage. They got a message, etched in spores on a drone's casing. The ground is remembering. They laughed. The eyes did not. They whispered windward, carrying pollen encoded with warnings. The data farms began failing. Blossoms bloomed in server vents. The Thorn Warden appeared in the core's atrium with sap dripping from his palms. This isn't vengeance, he said. It's inheritance. They called for security. But no one came. The security had been listening to the wind, to the trees, to the echo of the future still. Chapter 3. Eltharion unplugged. The cores were dismantled. Ardens reclaimed circuitry. New labs emerged, not above, but within nature. Co-designed, co-maintained. The Thorn Warden disappeared. But the eyes remain, and every decade, new children take the Warden's path marked not by destruction, but by devotion. Now deep beneath the tallest tree, carved into the roots in a script that glows only under stormlight. The fiercest war is the one waged within, and when you win it, the world wins too. Grow, guard, give back. Title, The Fire Within the Hollow. Year, 145,769,230.8. Era, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the root-cloaked glades of Eltharion, society was governed not by law, but by prophecy. Each child, upon coming of age, visited the oracle in reverse, so named because she did not foretell futures. She unraveled pasts. Her cave walls were strung with threads of memory, and when she spoke, your own voice echoed back, twisted just enough to teach. But one girl heard nothing. No echoes, no threads, only a faint pulse coming from deep inside the hollow tree at the center of the village. That girl would become the heart of the hollow tree. She refused the oracle's blessing, and so was exiled. Chapter 2. In exile, she studied roots. She tended wounded birds. She listened. Eventually people came to her not for prophecy, but for warmth. She did not offer answers. She offered questions. She sang songs with no words and healed wounds with poems. Children who failed the oracle's test found comfort in her shade. Parents who broke under community judgment found grace in her silence. And when the village began to fracture, when those who followed prophecy turned against those who didn't, it was her grove they fled to. The oracle herself came, walking backward as always. The heart waited and whispered, "Define yourself. Lose yourself and let set your spirit on fire." The hollow tree burst into bloom. Chapter 3. The oracle wept. Her threads unraveled willingly, woven into garlands that hung across the grove. Else were unchanged. No more was prophecy enforced. Now it was interpreted together. The heart of the hollow tree was never crowned, never titled, but every path in the village now curved subtly toward her grove. The oracle retired beneath the tree she once ignored. In the bark, a cavity glows faintly warm enough to comfort, too dim to burn. On a stone near the tree's roots is carved the message passed from hand to hand, written with each generation. Find yourself, lose yourself, in what sets your spirit on fire. Build justice, with compassion and truth, with love. Title, The Echo Left Behind. Year, 145,576,923.1. Era, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. There was no moon in Malinus, only a pale glow that flickered with every breath of the city, syncopated and strange, as though the light itself was remembering something long buried. The child of the void was born beneath that flicker, not into fanfare, but into forgetting. Her parents were archivists of emotion, collecting the discarded memories of others, so no one would need to feel them again. She was raised in the museum of lost grief. She was not supposed to feel, but she did. Each archived sorrow left an echo in her mind. She could not sleep without hearing other screams softened into sighs. The hand of renewal found her weeping in the gallery of unspoken failures. He offered no comfort, only truth. Time moves forward, he said, but the soul often lingers for its lesson. Chapter 2. Together, they begin revisiting the archives, not to preserve, but to confront. They unraveled old pain, like thread, rewove it into new stories, tales of survival, of quiet victory, of broken people learning to shape light from wound. The archivist protested. The child was cast out. She wandered the descent where forgotten thoughts drifted like fog. She breathed them in, faced them, named them, and one night, the flickering sky above Malinus stilled. For the first time in centuries, a full, silver moon rose. People stared upward in silence. They remembered. Chapter 3. The museum became a sanctuary not for suppression, but reflection. Pain was still collected, but now it was shared, not hidden, interpreted, not sealed. The hand of renewal vanished soon after. Some say he never existed, only a part of the child grown too soon. She never claimed leadership. She simply stood at the entrance, welcoming the next echo, now inscribed above the gates of the museum, in a spiral that must be read slowly. Time moves forward, but the soul often lingers for its lesson. Meet it, feel it, become, and begin again. Idle. The ceremony of stillness. Year 145,384,615.4. Era, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the cold marble city of Naktheran, knowledge was sacred, preserved in crystal tones, and recited through elaborate rites. Every morning, scholars in ceremonial robes read aloud truths so old they outlived meaning. But no one spoke to the street sweepers. No one wept with the widows. No one asked the gardeners how their hands were doing. The echo of a lost realm had once been a high archivist, her voice echoing across the great dome, her memory flawless. But one winter morning, she found her apprentice collapsed beside the fountain, unnoticed by any in the plaza. She resigned that day. She went to live in the outer dust, where the one who waits kept silent vigil beside an unopened gate. Chapter 2. The one who waits was rumored to be a prophet. He was not. He was simply the last to leave his post, the guardian of forgotten rituals, never meant to be locked away. He taught her nothing, but in his silence, she learned everything. She watched how he shared food before eating, how he listened before judging, how he honored pain as much as success. She returned to Naktheran years later, not to reclaim status, but to dismantle it. She walked into the great dome during the ritual of remembering and interrupted the high scholar mid-chant. Honor without heart becomes tyranny dressed in ceremony, she said. Then sat. Chapter 3. The chamber froze, then fractured. Some laughed nervously. Others wept quietly at first, then openly. One child approached her with a poem they'd written, but never dared read aloud. The one who waits entered next. Together, they placed a blank tome on the altar. Its title glowed. Now, from that day forward, The rituals were reformed. For every truth spoken, a question had to follow. For every rite, a real act of kindness. For every scholar, a week in service to the outer boroughs. The old tomes remained, but beside them grew a new shelf. The library of living hearts, carved into its door. Honor without heart becomes tyranny, dressed in ceremony. Let empathy turn truth into wisdom. Title, The Weight of Knowing. Year, 145,192,003, 107.7. Era, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The Republic of Beltrax prized knowledge above all. Its towers stretched like needles into the sky, each floor a tier of truth. The higher you ascended, the more secrets you unlocked. Citizens wore their rank as ocular prisms, lenses that changed color with each verified theorem mastered. There was no room for doubt, no space for question, until the seer of forgotten paths returned. She had once been a scholar of the 10th tier, disappeared after claiming the final truth was unknowable. They called her mad. She walked into the waste without a prism. And now, years later, she walked back, eyes uncovered, voice calm. "It's not what you bear," she said at the base of the truth spire. "It's what you're willing to lay down that makes you mighty." Chapter 2. The eyes at the edge watchers of descent and anomaly were dispatched. But instead of arresting her, they listened. She spoke not in refutation, but in riddles. Certainty is a mirror that cracks too clean. Doubt is the doorway with no lock. Scholars cheered, but then one of the prisms turned black. Another shattered mid-lecture, and the seer knelt in the square, placing her hand upon the stone. The ground glowed, not with power but with memory. The land itself seemed to sigh, as if exhausted by the weight of conclusions. Students gathered. The eyes knelt beside her. Chapter 3. The truth spire was not dismantled. It was opened. Paths now spiraled both upward and inward. Debate halls became sanctuaries of inquiry, not dominance. A new class of thinkers emerged, those who pursued the questions, not just the answers. The seer disappeared again, this time not into exile, but legend. At the gate of the new university, where prisms are placed only by choice, an inscription glows in shifting ink. It's not what you bear, it's what you're willing to lay down that makes you mighty. Seek, stumble, grow.